Welcome to Marketing After Hours with JumpFly, where marketing meets creativity. All day, we're heads down in PPC, social media, Amazon, SEO, and more. After hours, we talk shop. Because when the day ends, the best conversations begin.
Welcome to JumpFly's Marketing After Hours. I'm your host, Linda. Today's topic is PPC Survival Guide. So because of that, we brought our Vice President of Search, over 23 years in the industry, 20 with JumpFly. She has all the nuances in her back pocket from knowing where it started before Google did it and where we are today and what that means when you're setting up a campaign so that it can function properly and not just waste money. On the other side of the coin, we have someone that's newer to the industry, been with JumpFly for 3 years. Alex is what I would say a different demographic. He's learning where the platform is now and what he can evolve it into for his own expertise. And Nikki takes both sides of the coin because she has to evolve, but that's not where she started. So I think it gives us a unique perspective when it comes to our clients, especially when we're targeting a particular human or conversion opportunity, what it means to somebody perhaps in Alex's generation, or maybe Nikki's, or the expertise that applies to all of them. So let's raise our glasses to a successful survival of the PPC industry.
Nice.
And how JumpFly might be able to help.
That's a good toast right there. Good job.
Yes. Very good. Alex doesn't have the angst of wanting things the way they used to be. So he just.
Yeah, I mean,
it's kind of nice. You free up that space in your head for.
That is true. That is true. I couldn't imagine thinking about things 5-10 years ago and comparing. And I mean, I get there's value in it for experienced people, but for me, it just seems like so much because it's always changing.
It is always changing.
And then you have Nikki going, if only we could do it like we did it before.
Yeah.
Oh, that's another thing that would drive me crazy too.
Yeah.
The old days.
Yeah, the things that have been taken away is probably the hardest. You know, I get that things have to evolve and change, and that's great. But sometimes the way things worked better. You had more control. You had more ability to show the data to clients. And that's the hardest thing is when things get taken away and then you don't have the tools at your, in your toolbox anymore to help make things better or optimize and stuff. That's I think one of the hardest things.
And I think from a client's perspective, you're having to explain that to them.
Yeah, especially if they've been doing it for so long and they know, like I'll hear, oh, we used to be able to do XYZ, whether it was a report or it was excluding something. And it's really hard to say, well, we can't do that anymore.
Especially if there's no explanation.
Right.
It's like you just say, hey, it's gone.
Right.
We don't know why it's gone. They didn't tell us why it's gone, but it's gone. There's really nothing we can do.
Exactly. The other one is I actually had this conversation yesterday with a client because we were talking about click costs, how much click costs have gone up. And I was telling him that no matter how much I don't like it, because he was saying how much he didn't like it. And I said, and I don't like it either, but I have to work within the ecosphere that we have and try to get you the best results possible with the tools that we have. So I literally had that conversation yesterday with the client.
And I think it's very common. And one of the things that we wanted to touch on today was the difference between manual bidding and automated bidding. Mm-hmm. So
that's the big struggle right there. With this. Yeah, that's a great lead in.
With an introduction to so many tools that supposedly do the job for you, how do you know when it's best to use manual or the automated scenario? And why would you use something? It's the newest, latest, and greatest. Mm-hmm. But is there a purpose beyond that? And does it apply to everybody across the board?
That's a great question. I don't think anything in the pay-per-click world applies to everybody across the board. So let's get that out of the way. You have to test and look at the data. You have to let the data tell you. I think the hardest thing is it's not apples to apples sometimes when you're testing. So because Performance Max has platforms in it or networks in it that it is estimating conversions. So you can't just do a search campaign and a shopping campaign on non-smart bidding, let's say, and compare it to how a Performance Max campaign is on smart bidding, because you have to do smart bidding on Performance Max because that's not an apples to apples. But So that piece is hard. And we've tested, the nice thing is on some of these campaigns, like if I wanted to do a search campaign and do a test, I could do an actual 50-50 split. I could have it on non-smart bidding and then test what would happen if I put it on target ROAS. So that is a safe way of checking and making sure that
as long as you
the
don't
data,
have it in PMAX.
Well, that's for a search campaign.
Got it.
Yeah. So a search campaign, I can test and see, is a target ROAS going to get me better results? Or is keeping control of the bids and keeping it on a manual bidding, which we only have manual CPC anymore because enhanced CPC has been sunset. That's the test.
So you work with very large clients at our office with your history and your expertise.
I still have small clients.
I was just wondering how Alex, who works with the team with some of our smaller budgets, do you have that same philosophy in mind? Are you able to test when you have a smaller allocation of funds, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing with manual bidding for us is more often than not with our small clients, we do start with manual bidding because there are times when we just look at the budget and we say, listen, we want to get this amount of traffic a day.
Mm-hmm.
You're only spending $4,000 a month. And if you go with certain automated bid strategies, it's going to optimize a certain way. At least with manual, you have more control. And I think that's the key about manual bidding is control over what you're doing. I mean, especially now because enhanced CPC is gone, what you're bidding is what you're bidding with these manual bids. So I think when you have a smaller client, and again, this doesn't apply for every time, but when you're trying something new with them, having control is valuable because you want to work within the strict parameters they have. And now, of course, that could depend too on what industry they're in, because some industries, there is volume up the wazoo for what you're going after. And then sometimes you're working with something that's more niche. So maybe you have a small budget, but you don't need to spend a lot because there's not a lot of volume there. But if there's a ton of volume, like let's say you're selling t-shirts or something, there is countless volume there and you need to have control over the small budget you have. Mm-hmm. Having that control is valuable. Now, if you go for a while and maybe they expand their budget, or maybe you see what the costs per click are and you can kind of work with some of those parameters a little looser and try things, then we can start to say, let's go after some conversion value automated, and you see how that works. I think more often than not, it's just good to start with that control. Whereas,
I absolutely agree with.
Yes.
Even when we start campaigns for somebody who's established, we will almost always put them on a non-smart bidding.
Right.
Because the campaign needs data. Now, I've been told by some Googlers, oh, you don't need to do that anymore. And we've tested it, and it still doesn't seem to work out as well as us starting on a smart bidding. The only problem is PMAX, Performance Max. You can't put on a manual bidding. So that one has to go on a smart bidding right off the bat.
Right.
So what you kind of bring up an interesting topic. The Googlers are saying that you really don't need to, that it will learn itself, or it has a collection of data that it's already pulling from.
Right.
But from JumpFly's perspective, we're working with the client. We're that go-between, and we're fiscally responsible for the budget they're allocating. So is it the trust that maybe that information isn't there, or the control, like you talk about, that puts those things together so that we're using the budget that the client is giving us in a conservative manner until we know for sure changing that strategy might make more sense?
We haven't seen that it works yet. Even being told that, and we've tested it again, it still doesn't. The data doesn't show us that starting on a max conversion or a max conversion value tends to work as well. It seems to be better to run it for a couple weeks. Depends on, again, the budget and the volume and how fast, whether you switch it to a smart bidding.
Yeah.
But starting on a manual bidding seems to still, at least at this point, work better. And I love how you said that's how I always feel with our Google reps. It's great that we have assigned Google reps. But what I tell our clients is those Google reps are salespeople. They have things that they need to do for their job. And my job is to make sure that the things they're recommending make sense based on your actual goals.
They might be having multiple products going on at once where they say, we want to spend just this on this. We want to get this much volume here. Right. It's all based on the business.
Yep.
Do you think that there's a risk then? I mean, we're that go-between. We're the ones that are basically analyzing suggestions. Obviously, some are very good. but we also know the client and their intent.
Right.
So if someone were managing their own campaigns and they're looking at this opportunity to automate something, make it easier because it's not their expertise, and they're relying on the system to say, this is what you should be doing. I feel
That's
like that
where people get
relationship.
into trouble.
Yeah, I feel
100%.
like JumpFly is that cushion between logic and opportunity.
Yeah, the Google platform itself makes a lot of recommendations, and those recommendations don't take into account those goals.
Well, it goes
So
back to what you said. There's no black and white answer.
Yeah.
Like for that, it's like it's a checklist. There's really no
Right.
checklist for every single business.
Right. There's definitely, so where that go between what the Google UI is recommending, what the Googlers are recommending, and not to say Googlers are bad. That's not at all my intent. We work with some really great Google teams. It's just that
They don't know your client.
they don't know the client.
They know how it works.
and they know what Google has shared with them.
Right.
But they don't manage day to day. So that's the other piece that I think is missing. Is they don't see necessarily the fluctuations. They don't see, we make this change. This is what happens in the account, and now we have to react. So they don't necessarily see
And
that
they have
either.
no history. Basically, you know if you've tested something before.
Yeah.
You
Mhm.
know what results you might have received.
Right.
When it comes to these bids or the automated versus, is there kind of a benchmark where you say, I think we've spent enough here, we've learned enough, and now we want to go somewhere else? Or do you
There's
just...
not really a benchmark, but you got to look at the data. You got to make sure it's statistically significant. So if you have a
Yeah.
smaller, account, whether it's a smaller account or it's a campaign with a smaller budget, you have to let it go for long enough that you get statistically significant information.
Right.
You have to know how long an attribution window is. Let's say your attribution window is 18 days, but you only run the campaign for 2 weeks. Well, you haven't even given it a full 18
Mhm.
days of data and then some. Some of the experiments that the Google system will actually completely disregard the first 2 weeks of data. When you're doing an actual experiment, it'll say the
Oh.
first 2 weeks of data are thrown out. I think it's 2 weeks, might be 11 days, 10 days, something like that. But it'll throw that out of the equation completely because it's so much into the learning. So
That brings up the whole thing of, listen, if you start off a campaign on automated bidding, you kind of got to set this expectation. Look, Google needs to learn.
yeah,
Like you can turn it on right away and you could see impressions be really low because it's still trying to learn what people to go after, what to target. It could take a day, it could take a few days, it could take a week. That's
it
the
could
thing.
even be when you switch a campaign. You
Yeah.
still have to, you just can't switch it and be like 2 days, oh, this isn't working. You still, whether you've had all of that time on a manual conversion and then you switch it, there's still a learning period.
Let me
Right.
answer a question for somebody that's very novice. So you talk about this learning thing
Mm-hmm.
and it being Google.
Right.
Explain the way that these things are accomplished. Is it a bot? Is it so much of this? So when somebody says we have to give it time to collect data, what is it that it's looking for? What is it that somebody who doesn't know what Google does, how do you explain this is
Well,
what we need?
That's $1 million question because we don't even actually know all of the pieces that Google needs, but to be able to do that.
Algorithm is the key word in my
Yeah,
opinion.
exactly. It's
Yeah.
the algorithm has to get enough data.
So it's not people. We know there's no
it's
people doing this.
completely on Google's black box
Okay.
of data, all the points.
The reason why you say algorithm is key is because it gives the indication that it's an active machine.
Yeah.
So it's like a mind of its own, but it's not a human. Because the algorithm gives the sense of here is a bunch of data and it's going to give like outcomes
Right.
and determine things. It's not just like one input, boom, there it is.
Right.
It is an active learning
And it
mathematic
constantly
equation.
learns.
Yeah. Like
Okay.
the mind of its own, but not the human. That's kind of what I would
And I think
explain an
that-
algorithm
That's a
to.
good.
Somebody needs to if they need to understand why you're telling them we need to give it time or we need to do that. You want to make sure that it's a practical application that they can absorb.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really hard when they say, well, how long?
Mm-hmm.
We don't know.
We don't know because it's all based on volume. If you give it a really healthy budget, it can learn. The machine learns faster. Machine learning, the algorithm gets updated faster. If it's a small budget, takes a lot longer. So, but that's another not one size fits all.
Right.
I can't say in a week we'll know the answer to this question because it depends on your website, how fast it converts or what the goal is. Maybe it's pick up a phone and call or whatever. But you have to really just give it time. And again, let the data tell you, let it be statistically significant. That's the hardest thing too, is making sure you're not going with gut. It's let the data tell you.
And you got to make sure the data you're collecting is good.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at conversion tracking and everything you're pulling in, that makes a huge difference, because if you're pulling in bad data, then you're not going to get good results. You're not giving Google something reliable to work with. You got to make sure what you give Google is actually good.
Well, those signals themselves guide what you do next. So if it's not accurate information, how do you make the changes that are going to have a positive impact?
Right. The other thing is making sure you know the goal to get before you launch the campaign. We had a client who was, I want to do an awareness campaign. So it was awareness. It was a video campaign. It was awareness. But then they graded it on the fact that it wasn't turning into business for them from a click conversion standpoint. And we kept saying, but you told us you wanted awareness. That's a completely different goal setup. So if you're grading it on whether it's actually bringing you sales, that was a misalignment. You need to have said, I want this campaign to drive sales. So it's a video for action campaign, not a awareness campaign. So sometimes a client doesn't really, they tell you the wrong thing. So the campaign is working for what it was intended to be, but not what the client wanted.
Well, that kind of goes right into structure, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you don't have the right outcome planned for the strategy for that structure, you won't, you received favorable results based on how you structured it to accomplish its goal.
Yes.
Okay.
And I think that's a PPC survival skill from the standpoint of what is the ultimate goal of the campaign, making sure you set it up and you figure out what those KPIs are, what the key performance indicators, how you're going to grade it is before you start it. So there is very few campaigns that are one size fits all. It can't do awareness and drive action usually at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, that's why you segment things out. That's why you pay attention to the small details, because you could have two very similar campaigns with different goals.
Right.
Like, for example, if you have multiple display ads, one is just awareness. You're trying to get it in front of people.
So you're prospecting, let's say.
Exactly. And then others might actually be looking for business conversions, whether that's leads, sales, whatever. But those are two very different things. When you think about it, you might be having similar messaging, but the actual goal is very, very different.
Yeah,
and
having a remarketing campaign versus a prospecting campaign.
Right.
Don't mix those two. Even though they're both a display campaign, or maybe they're both video campaigns, they're two different audiences and they're going to react differently, and you want the messaging to be different. So don't mix those up. Keep them separate. That's another PPC survival skill.
That leads me to the survival of your keyword selection.
Yeah.
So is there a time or a reason to use broad match?
Yeah, actually there is. My biggest favorite of broad match, now I don't use it as a rule for campaigns when we're launching a general campaign, a search campaign that has no brand in it. But broad match with brand protection works really well. So let's say I was going to sell Nike shoes. I could have a broad match campaign, but I have the brand protection of Nike. And Google's brand protection is smart enough to know that Air Jordans or Air Force Ones are a Nike product.
Okay.
So I can do a broad match campaign with brand protection. And then I could get a lot more volume. That is, it has to be what they show you on has to be Nike or Air Jordan or Air Force One. It can't be
so there's a parameter guiding
Adidas.
general.
It's broad match with guardrails, and that is one of my favorite. I really like broad match with brand protection. You can't do it for somebody who's a small brand that Google doesn't know. But if you're reselling something in particular, like I had an AED client, and we do that for them. It works really well because all the different brands of the AED. So you have one campaign for, let's say, Zoll, one for Philips. That works really well. I have another one that sells hardware, like on doors and cabinets and things like that, doing broad with brand protection for each of those different brands. And it's a different campaign for each one. Works fantastic. Broad is replacing phrase match, I think, in quality. Phrase match terms.
They're bad.
They really bad. And we're talking really, Google and Microsoft here. I'm not talking broad in Microsoft at all, though. This is specifically for Google. But phrase match terms across the board seem to are living their end of days.
They're
let's say.
brutal. I mean, it's brutal.
I'm pausing
Ugh.
more and more phrase match terms where
So are we.
broad match has been allegedly reinvented completely from the ground up. So it is performing most of the time better than phrase. So I'm a more of a mix. If I am going to test broad, it goes into the campaign with the exact term. And I do it sparsely. I don't do a broad match term for every single exact
Right.
match keyword I have.
Okay.
I pick a few key broad match terms and then see what happens.
We do a similar thing, and not across the board. It's just with a few of them, but we do things where we say, okay, here's our biggest, most relevant keyword.
Yeah.
And we will do a broad match of that.
Do you do it in the campaign or do you do it
Yes.
so in the existing campaign that already lives in?
Yes, yes. And now to your point too about phrase match, we're running less and less of those. And it's kind of instead we're like, okay, maybe to start off, if we need to build some volume, we'll do a little phrase match.
So
But
you
if-
can keyword mine. So you're mining for
Exactly.
good keywords. You're adding them as exact match keywords.
Exactly.
And then, yeah.
And then, you filter out which ones are no good. But then as time goes on and we're seeing success, we will go in and say, okay, here's what they do at the highest level. Like this is their number one product, their number one service. So then we'll put that as a broad match, pause out most or all the phrase match, and then we'll have mostly exact match running with a few broad match.
Yeah.
And what I find really interesting, obviously Google, to your point, is getting more sophisticated with filtering out broad match, is the search terms we're getting back are pretty good. I mean, they're not all perfect, but they're pretty good initially from broad match. But then you look at phrase match and I'm like, they're bringing in all these different competitor names that we don't want. They're bringing in things that are just really off the rails, weird, and you keep having to add more negatives.
Yeah.
So,
when you have to chase more negatives because
Yeah.
it's so bad. I literally paused all the phrase match for one campaign yesterday. It's a lingerie or bras and panties, let's say. That's the particular client. And it was showing instead of it got really down in the weeds on underwear. Like
fruit of the loom.
I would spend more time trying to add negatives
Yes.
to try to, so I paused all the phrase match terms. I mined it for good stuff that wasn't in the account that we needed to add. And then I paused all the phrase match because it was just wasting
Such a
wasting
shift
money.
where
It
broad
is.
match and then
Oh, unless I wanted to
expanded,
find
but-
something. I'm sorry, Linda. I wanted to
Sure.
find something because you had said, so we have keywords. I think this is important. You have a keyword. So the keyword is bra and panty set. Sorry. And then the search term of somebody searching could be I'm looking for fruit of the loom underwear. That's the search term. That's what somebody searched
Right.
that got mapped to the keyword.
Right.
And I think making sure that people who are listening understand that designation. You have the keyword that you're advertising on, and you have the search term that somebody searched on and saw that ad for the keyword.
Right. Like I had phrase match running for one of our clients, and a lot of the search terms were like other brands of competitors.
Yeah.
That's what we were getting a lot of. And then we were getting some really, like I said, off the rails results where it's like, okay, you're looking for, like, we're doing something a little more niche with this one client, but these were people looking for like getting mortgages, and that's just not what they do, and just things that were completely unrelated. At least with some of the broad match search terms that we've seen come in through more specific clients, like one that sells reusable balloons, for example. And those search results are pretty darn good, even without a lot of guardrails on them. Occasionally you'll get something, but they're pretty good. But if you ran like a phrase match, you would be getting like diaphragm balloon surgery. Weird stuff like that. It's like, okay, that's not even close.
That's not even the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. That is beyond.
No.
That's what I was calling the
No.
6 degrees of Kevin Bacon.
But we used
for
to worry
search
about
terms
that
and
with
search
broad
queries.
match. So it's kind of a shift, and it's proves again that we are literally always in an environment that's moving.
Yeah.
I
You have to
remember
stay on
when
top
broad
of.
match became much more loosey-goosey way back in like 2008, maybe 2009, somewhere in there.
Right around there.
And I remember saying to our Google reps, like, what happened to broad match? Broad match is gone. Because it used to be if the term was red sneakers, the word red and the word sneakers had to be in the search term somewhere. But it could be looking for sneakers that have red soles. That would apply for broad match. And then all of a sudden we started seeing something where red and sneakers wasn't even in the search. Actually, we didn't get search query data. We just knew that broad match, which had ruled for a really long time, died.
Yes.
And then 6 months later, after us complaining, they finally came out with the search term reports, the search query reports, so you could see what the heck those things were.
And you use those, like you had said, to mine.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
what did I possibly miss in my keyword research that really is relevant? Or, oh my gosh, look what I'm showing on. Let's eliminate it.
So
It
now
shows
we've
you
come
how they're
full circle.
searching certain things. Like you might have the keyword in it, but people are searching a certain way with certain terminology. You can say, okay, that's a way to go after is how
Right.
people are actually searching. Like you might have, an ad for, I don't know, sneakers, for example, but people are searching a certain brand that you're advertising a certain way and you don't have it as a keyword, like that's helpful.
Right. That is helpful. But yeah, you're right. We have completely come full circle on broad match. So time will tell if broad match becomes the only, if Google takes away match types completely and broad match won't even be a match type anymore because it'll just be those keywords.
And our topic is survival. So, if they don't have an agency like JumpFly or somebody that can understand the nuances that have literally shifted from trusting a phrase match campaign to not believing in it at all, to having hundreds of keywords in a particular ad group, to parsing it down to 20, to growing it back up again. That's a constantly moving environment.
It is.
Is there something, if they don't have an agency, if they don't have a JumpFly, what do they need to watch? What is it that you think would trigger them?
Well, they can't set it and forget it. You're that is definitely not something you can do. And you have to look at your search queries. You have to run them. We have some clients, we do them every other day. We have some every week we're checking search queries, especially when the campaigns are new.
Yes.
And then, ones that are tried and true and have they're consistent.
Sure.
Those we maybe only have to do once a month.
Or if you see an anomaly.
I did have a client the other day I was talking to, and he's like, I saw that we showed up, there's like 16,000 search queries. And I said, and he's like, he wanted to know what we were to add. And I said, well, really, I'm not going to add something that's had one impression and 0 clicks.
Right.
You got to try to find patterns. Like mortgage. You said mortgage was one. That company didn't sell mortgage. So you can add mortgage and mortgages as a negative across the whole account and wipe out a whole chunk without having to add individual because there is a cap.
Yep.
There is a cap on the number of negatives.
Well, does that kind of show you that your campaigns are not, like you said, I paused everything instead of going through and...
Except for one. One of them had converted twice.
Okay.
And so I thought, all right, let's let this one live, and everything else got paused.
Well, that's a good point because sometimes you get keywords that convert more than maybe you think, or they kind of bring in some traffic that you wouldn't expect to convert, but they do.
Right.
I mean, that's something to keep an eye on too. I think what's interesting as well is when you look at like a search query report and you see what's coming through, and they don't always give you every single keyword.
Yeah,
obviously.
thank you. I was going to bring that up.
It's hard, but what you do see is valuable information.
Yeah.
It's just hard when you can't see all of it. And it's interesting to see which ones they tell you converted and which ones are like, oh, these converted, but we're not showing you
Yeah,
those.
about 60% of the search query data you don't actually get to see. So that is
So it's still close.
really important. Yeah, so 60. Yeah, you don't. And it varies, but yeah, about 60% of that data Google does not show for privacy reasons, but it's not
your
logical on that.
We don't hold the keys, unfortunately.
We
but
don't hold the keys.
We work and play nice in the sandbox.
Yes.
When it comes to building or structuring an account and all these nuances come into play and you think, oh, this is latest and greatest, what's the difference between why would you set up a PMAX versus a traditional shopping search or display campaign? You talked about it earlier when you want to learn something and control a bit more before you do. But should everybody lean into the PMAX or do you think traditional search, display, and shopping campaigns have a role even in this day?
From my standpoint, Performance Max does not fit for all clients. It's again that not one size fits all.
Right.
You have to have good assets.
Mm-hmm.
And we're talking on a full PMAX, not a feed-only PMAX right now. So if the client doesn't have good imagery, if the client doesn't have video, or doesn't have good enough imagery, we can build the video for them. It does not make sense to do Performance Max.
So if you were starting a campaign yourself without an agency it's easy to just push the button, do PMAX.
No, it's not really easy because you have to build it and you have to give it lots and lots of
Signals?
pieces.
Okay.
You have to give it logos, images, video, headlines, long headlines, descriptions, and then you also have to do search themes and the
You have the signals.
and then you
Yep.
have signals. So
And what
those-
signals are out there for
Yeah.
depending on what they're doing? That's another factor too. Like how much of that audience is out there that you could capture?
And the other key is if you don't have good conversion tracking, going back to what Alex was saying about accuracy, especially if you're lead gen and all it is an easy to fill form on your website that's a conversion, do not do PMAX because all it will happen is Google will latch on to a easy source of conversions and you can get a lot of spam.
Lot of spam.
So for lead gen clients, doing something called an offline conversion is really key, and that's what you use as your signal. For example, using JumpFly as a client, as their website. You can go to our website and fill out an audit form. We don't use that as our conversion goal for the campaigns because it's too easy for spam to get done. We do through Salesforce when one of our salespeople turns it to working. That gets fed back as an offline conversion, and that is our goal for those campaigns, a working lead. So it weeds out and it gives Google the signals of these are good leads. These are leads that were legitimate. They are not spam. Get me more like this. So from a PMAX standpoint, it's a lot easier on shopping because it's a purchase.
Yes.
Sure.
So PMAX can work really well for that. I've also got many clients who we've backed away from Performance Max, where we're doing search and shopping again, and only search and shopping, and we're not doing Performance Max full because
You're doing traditional shopping.
Yeah, or feed only Performance
Yeah.
Max,
Right.
where it's theoretically only showing on shopping, because I've had clients say, I'm spending 20, 30, 40% more in Google. My advertising has gone up. I did not see that corresponding lift, even close,
In sales.
in overall sales.
Yeah,
Looking at
right.
overall sales.
Sure.
So I've had probably 5 to 8 clients come to me and say, we did not see a lift when we started spending more and more on, because Performance Max looks like it's doing great. So we've backed away for quite a few clients. And I know other agencies are saying the same thing. This isn't just a JumpFly thing or just a me thing. Other account managers here and other agencies have said the same thing. So we're going back to search and shopping traditional or Performance Max feed only.
Are there learnings from PMAX that you can apply then to these, or are they really isolated in that
Not
regard?
really, because we're getting more, which I appreciate that Google is listening, because since Performance Max has come out, they've added more and more insights.
There was very little to start.
Yeah, it was a very much a
Shockingly
black
little.
box when it first started. So,
Yeah.
but still, the data isn't robust enough for us to really
Yeah.
and truly translate it to across other. Let's say clients are doing Meta, or they're
Okay.
there's learnings there are really, really tough.
Yeah.
So we do have more clients that are saying, let's see what happens. Let's test it. And I have one client, that hardware client that I was talking about earlier. When they came to us because the agency had pushed them on PMAX. They were doing PMAX. They were spending more, did not see a corresponding lift. So we switched back to search and shopping, traditional, and they saw their revenue overall going back up again.
Yeah. That's
Wow.
not surprising.
Yeah,
It's another one that
It's like Google has to adapt to its own creation. Like it brings this in, it's getting these results, and then you're running into these troubles. It's like they got to fix what they did in a number of ways, especially
clients aren't trusting the data that they're getting from Google, and that's a problem.
big problem.
That is a problem.
Especially when it's a lot of spam leads and you get the issues with that. That's really tough, because you can be looking at your data and saying, well, we have this, this, and this. But though usually you can tell when spam leads increase, like if you have a campaign that's been running and it's going pretty steady in terms of conversions, then all of a sudden there's this massive hike.
Right.
That's kind of a warning right there that there's likely spam leads. And we've emailed clients saying, hey, we saw this spike. we think it might be spam leads based on certain trends, and they'll say, yes, our inbox is filled with these fake
Spam
leads.
So what triggers that, right? It's running
We don't know.
smoothly and then all
Google
of a sudden?
finds a source or some new player comes into the market, and you can't exclude search partners on a PMAX campaign in particular, where you can, and that's where a lot of spam leads come from search. You know, you can turn it off on search, you can turn it off on shopping after you evaluate it. You can't do that. The other thing that we see that can cause an issue is audiences can spike in Microsoft. So there's the audience network. It's the Microsoft search audience network, MSAN. And those audiences can spike from us in a search campaign or a shopping campaign. And so that's another thing that if you are managing it yourself, you really need to be reviewing the search partner report, or the partner website report is what you need to look at in Microsoft and see what ones can I exclude. And then if you're working with an agency, usually the Microsoft rep can opt you out of that program. If you've done all of the things, there's like a whole litany of things. Lower bid on mobile, immediately, we have like a 300 number list of syndicated partners we exclude right from the get-go because they've proven to be wasteful. Using smart bidding, there's a couple other things that you have to do. And if you've done that and you can show the data that audiences are not performing, you can be opted out, but you have to have an agency rep to be able to do that.
Is it easy to know that that's what's happening?
No, you have to run a report.
So
you have to do
be
the
able
segment and see oh my gosh, audience is spiked. Then you have to go run the report. What can I exclude?
That's a tough one for somebody trying to manage their own account. Just
Yeah.
not knowing the nuances that happen.
Yeah.
And how to resolve them.
Especially, on our end too, like going back to Google for like most of our accounts, if not all, we kind of have our own list of exclusions because there are certain things we know we don't want to show on. We don't want to show on things that are graphic or rated X or a lot of like kids apps.
Kids games, kids apps.
Because
all
those are going to
things.
get clicked accidentally by kids playing on. Those are going to be wasteful clicks.
Yeah.
So we have these lists where we can apply these exclusions right off the bat so we try to minimize more, at least better optimize, not getting those wasteful clicks.
Exactly.
Well, we've talked about how we're trying to survive. We're trying to help our clients, but people managing their own accounts need to know some of these little nuances. And where that comes to play often is when Google has a recommendation. And so in the account, they recommend. And I'm not bashing Google because like you said, that happens. But how do you know whether they should be implementing or not implementing if you don't have a JumpFly? What does JumpFly do in adverse to that for the clients to determine whether these recommendations, because I think you end up with a wall saying, we're going to figure it out on our own. We're not just going to automatically take their recommendations. So what's the balance between understanding that there might be some value in what they're recommending versus we're not going to implement what they suggest until we've investigated
that's
it?
the hard thing because I don't know how to tell somebody. Don't blindly take them. We've had clients that are like, oh yeah, I took that
Everyone.
recommendation in there
Yeah.
because Google said to do it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh my gosh, you
Yeah.
just tanked your entire account.
Yeah.
Or I'll go
scary.
in and figure like what happened and I'll look at change history and I'll be like, oh,
One thing
please
that's
don't
helpful.
do that again. Yeah.
One thing that's helpful for me, at least with our small accounts, is sometimes the way I look at it is if it's a housekeeping thing, like add image extensions. Okay.
That's a great one.
Add site links, fix your broken links, things that are like housekeeping. Those are good to look at.
Right.
But if they're telling you raise your budgets and you don't have more budget, well, then
Or
no.
lower your ROAS goal.
Yeah.
That's a big one. You have to know what your goal is before you accept that one. There is no
It's risky.
guardrails. It is risky. I mean, it is risky to do that.
Does it jeopardize consistency? So let's just say they recommend something and you've talked about data and learning and setting these parameters. And when you do something new, you still might handhold it a bit more. Does that jeopardize that learning then? Does it start all over? Does it reset if you're accepting these things on a
Well, it depends on what it is.
It does throw it back into learning. If you change your budget, it goes back into learning. If you change let's say you raise your TCPA goal. So you're raising the goal of, let's say, from a lead from $80 to $100. That throws it into learning. Or you lower your ROAS goal. We do it on purpose
Testing.
my team will do it on purpose in order to, especially if we start seeing performance decline, we will make a change specifically to force it to go back into learning. Because if you turn a performance max campaign, let's say, or anything with smart bidding on, and you'll start to see volume go down and down and down and down and down. It just happens. You see it happen. So we'll tweak it. We'll usually only 10%. And if you're doing any changes, almost always it's recommended only in 10% increments, whether you're going up or down, because anything else, I call it the Kermit the Frog, where he goes his hands like this and goes, and runs around. I feel like that's what Google does if you give it too big of a budget increase or decrease or change the goals and stuff.
Well, you're doing
like
that intentionally. It's not
We're
like you're
doing
just
it intentionally in order to push it into learning.
Right.
Because then volume can come back. But you'll see that. So again, anything with smart bidding, just because your goal has been 400 all the time, and you can start to see that performance go down if you're not kind of playing with it. Jack likes to say, one of our account manager, the account director here likes to say he gooses it. We toggle it, we tweak it. You just got to give it a little goose to try to.
Well, I remember years ago, and again, my days of management were short and a long time ago, but there was an account that was running very, very smoothly, and something changed in the rules, and you didn't want to touch that ad because then it could send it back to evaluation, and that could jeopardize its
review.
ability
We have
to
some
show,
clients
right?
we have some clients that are in this very sensitive area. That Brian Panty client that I was talking about, we have lingerie clients, we have some adult toy clients that you touching an ad sends it into review, and then it gets hit with adult, even though they've been manually overturned because did the
parameters change? Do they, make it stronger?
Right. So as long as you don't touch them, you can kind of be safe. But changing something, adding
all of a sudden it'll read it and it'll be like, oh, look at that.
Right.
Yeah.
So you're kind of
Naughty.
enticing them to come see what I've done, and yet even if it's just a bot, they're all of a sudden the parameters to disapprove it or suspend it come into play.
Google will change kind of their rules on the back end. So even those ones that haven't been touched can all of a sudden get disapproved because they've tightened something, or they've changed, something.
It senses activity somewhere and sniffs things out, like no matter what it is.
Well, I think we could cover this topic a great deal longer, but we're running out of time. And I was going to introduce the AI option, but I don't think we have enough time to discuss it because it's a huge opportunity. So we're going to have to save that for another
I think that could be a great
time.
episode all on its own.
Yeah.
Oh, we'll definitely be doing it.
Well,
Don't
we
worry.
did do some of the AI topic already, but I
Be
think
sure to
with
check that out.
regards to the implementation or Google recommendations, I think they're two separate things right now. And
Yes.
let's just visit that later. But I really want to thank Nikki and Alex for bringing some insight into whether an agency is helping you with this or you're looking at your campaigns. Sometimes there are things that are illogical, and our agency can help you understand them. If you don't have an agency, then don't just blindly go with what you think it is, because it could completely send it into a different direction, because it's not a human that says, oh, that was a natural mistake or that's a natural progression. It's an algorithm that's
and it's all based on a huge ecosystem as opposed to your ecosystem.
Yep. Stick with your goals, stick with your vision, stick with what you want to do.
So thanks, everyone. Really greatly appreciate it. Hope that you'll like and follow us. The next podcast will be coming up shortly, and we look forward to having you share it with us.
Yeah.
Thanks everybody.
Thank you.